Hello, dear colleagues, and today we continue our course related to digital technologies, and I'm going to talk about data management, data sharing, open data formats, and my examples will be related to biopharmaceutical sector of knowledge, but it's understandable that it could be also useful for other types of discoveries and research. My name is Konstantin Koshichkin, and I worked a lot with different types of data. I worked with multimodal large language models learning and data processing in large data sets, and I have about 20 years of experience. So you're welcome if you have any questions to write me a message by LinkedIn or email, and I will help you if something you need to clarify or you have any questions. So let's start with our topic for today. It will be about what's being changed in the area of data management and open data processing. And why is it important? First of all, we are working in the age of artificial intelligence, and all our AI-based solutions are working based on training, and this training was made on some types of data. And in many cases, we're utilizing multiple data sets and multiple data types to train certain models. And in our future, we are going to face these full-scale multimodal systems working with your data solutions. And to be able to utilize these life-changing technologies, we need to understand where this data is coming from. And of course, not all data could be trusted, and not all data is accessible. And to address these problems, we have so-called FAIR principles, which are being addressed to data. And I will try to talk a bit more about each attribute of these principles and how it's being corresponded with our data gathering and processing problems. So if we are following these principles, we are able to use this information multiple times, to exchange this data, to trust it in our systems. And as something to start with, we need to find this data. So it should be findable. It should have global identifiers or some database presence, so it will be possible to find this information. Also, we need to have metadata describing these datasets, because if we have some type of images and we are not sure what these images are about and what's present on them, it's impossible to utilize them in our pipelines. We need metadata. And now we have a lot of different search engines and structured databases where we can find this data, and addressing indexes in these databases will help us to find what we need to analyze. When we're talking about accessibility, we mean that we are able to retrieve this data with some kind of protocol. In previous times, it was based on some maybe physical drives exchange, but now everything is online. So we are talking about online access to this data. And in some cases, this access could be restricted, and we should analyze how these restrictions work and how we could overcome them and how it's being managed. So, of course, these limitations in access are in many cases necessary. For example, in our field of bioscience, we are working with, in many cases, we are working with our patient data, and it's strictly confidential, and of course, access to this data will be limited. Interoperability of data is related to utilizing common data formats and data standards, empowering vocabularies and structured representation of this data. And we are able to enrich our datasets with additional entities, which will allow us to integrate this data with other external datasets. So, as a result, this data will be reusable. So we are able to license this data somehow. So in many cases, I guess in all cases when we're talking about scientific data, it will be provided with some kind of license agreement, and we should analyze, will we be able to utilize this data, and what are the licensed purposes for data utilization? It could be only for research, education, or it could be available for commercial use and so on. There will be documentation describing this data. And of course, each scientific community have its own standards, and this reusable data will address these standards to be utilized in future. So, just a few examples. Crystal structures. It's a huge dataset with information about these crystals, and it could be utilized in multiple areas of science. Genome data is stored in specific data banks like GenBank, and it provides standardized formats and identifiers for genetic sequences, making them findable and reusable across scientific community. Another example, climate data. Many climate datasets are available, and they are gathered in consistence with FAIR principles, and there could be projects combining both data related to climate with data related to physical conditions, health conditions, and so on. And there are other examples. I will not name all of them. They could be found in this presentation. So, if we are talking about AI-driven data analytics, when we analyze huge datasets and we are following rules provided by our AI models, how these datasets should be represented. And there are a lot of examples of how it's being addressed. And for example, in healthcare, we have real-world evidence and real-world data when requirements to train these models, which will be able to provide certain diagnosis or to understand what are those or other symptoms and how they are related to your condition. We need to train this model based on data, and in major we have this data in our healthcare system, and we don't need to start gathering this from start. And right now, everything in healthcare is being changed to collect this data in the way so it will be possible to reuse this data and train our models based on this information. And right now we have multiple data sets which are being prepared to train AI solutions. Actually, we have dataset banks, and one of them is my favorites. It's Kaggle. There are a lot of scientific datasets hosted alongside with models, and based on this platform, scientists are competing with their models to predict something in these datasets, and it could be some kind of contest where we have a goal to provide a meaningful answer. Another way to find suitable scientific datasets will be to try Google dataset search. And of course, we have government-based dataset collections like data.gov, gathering data from different agencies in the United States. And multiple universities are providing their own datasets collected in the area of competence of these universities. So you are able to start with your problem, identify what is the major types of data you're interested in, and discover these databases and datasets to analyze. Just a few to name: OpenML, EasyNet, GenBank already named, and so on. And having this data in place allows us to create interoperability in our data exchange. And as a result, we're having ecosystems. And these ecosystems are a combination of different dataset management solutions working on a similar standards in a certain area of knowledge. And healthcare is a great example right now because in major cases we're using similar standards like HL7 or open health records, and we are able to utilize data collected in the standards in our solutions to analyze them later. And in many cases, these dataset collections are stored on a national level, so there are integrated national data ecosystems in multiple countries. And when we're trying to address this data dissemination, we should analyze from which countries we need to take this information, and we can try to address these ecosystems and try to extract or gain in some way data from this environment. And it could be made by projects involving multiple countries, multiple entities, multiple stakeholders to gather data from several national level ecosystems. Another type of these ecosystems could be on open source principles. For example, spyware is such a type of ecosystem. It's related to Internet of Things and big data, and multiple solutions could work in this framework without being related to a certain vendor lock. So it's quite interesting when we're working with smart cities, smart agriculture, and so on. Another open ecosystem is open data model, and it's utilizing cross ecosystem interoperability. And it could be done with automated model conversions. So we are able to define semantically our format and knowing meaning of a certain fields in a database, we are able to exchange data from one format to another without data loss. So it's quite possible to utilize such technology for interoperability. And another example is EdFile Alliance for schools, and it's also working with other types of data, and it's worth to mention. Right now, we have open data initiatives worldwide, and they are pushing us to open science, and our national agencies are working in these areas, as well as academic institutions, and as I already told, governments. And utilizing these principles and ideas allow us to increase accessibility to high quality datasets, to combine efforts from different experts and different institutions. For example, it could be done to increase antimicrobial resistance, or to share risk knowledge, or it could be federated programs for drug discovery. Also, I can mention several open data initiatives to be addressed if you need to get some usable information. Data.gov already mentioned, NYC Open Data, another repository of datasets, Scotland's Open Government Partnership, European Data Portal is also very important to mention, OpenStreetMap, it's like Google Maps, but it's open source. Mexican databases, common voices related to Mozilla Foundation, and so on and so on. So we have something to choose from. Another problem to mention is data governance. We need to understand how this data exchange will affect other entities, and how we could be sure that this data could be utilized. In many countries, this data related to personal information is protected by legislations like GDPR or HIPAA, and when we are working in area of healthcare and biopharmaceuticals, we should always try to understand how this information and datasets are being related to our patients. And when we're working with data, we should utilize data-centric approach. I mean, data related to medical issues and patients. And we need to analyze the whole life cycle of this information, how it's been gathered, processed, and utilized later, because there could be problems related to certain stage of this pipeline. Also, we have possibilities to automate this process and utilize AI on different steps there. It could be used in automated data discovery, for example, using tools to identify and catalog data across organization. And it could be AI-driven compliance, implementing machine learning algorithms to detect anomalies and ensure adherence to governance policies. And of course, in relation to a certain data entry, it's worth to be able to construct the whole pathway of this data to understand its lineage. Right now, we are in the process of introduction of new positions in organizations, like data stewards, data managers, data directors, and so on and so on. So these entities will be related to data governance to ensure that data gathering is being performed correctly, and these practices are aligned with all standards and regulations. And of course, there should be specific security and privacy measures, like granular access control, enforcing access at column level with high granularity based on user rights and requirements. Privacy by design, it's a thing which should be incorporated as a data protection principles from the beginning of system development. Dynamic data masking, also important, automatically obscuring sensitive information based on user permissions and data lineage. For example, it will cover names, certain numbers, or addresses, and so on. These frameworks are in process of implementation and development, so they're quite adaptive. And we need to understand that they will be improved in future because we are getting more and more information each day, and how to scale up this process is also very important because in many cases we are unable to control manually all these sources. We need to have data value metrics to understand, should we utilize this data, should we store it, is it worth to use this information? And we should predict changes in the data because it's not a constant thing that we are getting the same information day after day. It could be in decline or not, or otherwise it could be scaling up, and we should be ready for these changes. I already mentioned about real-world data, and I will say just a few things that it's playing increasingly more and more important role in biopharmaceutical research, and it's able to accumulate data from wearable devices, electronic health records, patient records, and so on. And in some cases, we are able to utilize this technology for treatment assessment, for evidence gaps in randomized clinical trials, when we are able to analyze huge data sets and extract this data from real life practice. And the integration of this technology and the data collection principles provide us with diverse data source to confirm our pharmacoeconomic budget impact models and improve patient engagement in future. And also this require to overcome multiple barriers related to data quality, data security, privacy, linking, and so on. So we need this data governance, which I was talking previously. Knowledge graphs are also very important when we're talking about multiple sources of information. If we want to organize in ontology data related to molecular structures in combination with drug targets, with genetic information, we need to understand how each of these entities address with each other. And if we're using ontologies, we're able to not only manage these data entities, but also relations between them. And it's very important how certain data fields are connected with each other and what we mean under these connections, because they will be different in different cases. And just a few things to say in addition about problems and new ideas how data management could be improved in future. First of all, we need to understand principles of data integrity, accessibility, and how to keep our data safe, how it could be accessible to our solutions without any risks of to lose this data, to have some problems on the technical side as a question. But there are problems related to human factors in this process. For example, there are multiple cases detected with research being a fraud based on generated data, utilizing AI models to create evidence which wasn't in real life, it wasn't ever detected in real data, it was totally generated. There are falsified papers, falsified research datasets, and it's quite important for us to understand how to distinguish real data from falsified, because if we will utilize these false facts, we will train our AI models, for example, based on this data. The whole results of our solutions will be compromised, and it's very important to be able to trust in this area, to gain trust and to keep it in place. So, one hand, we have proliferation of data generation tools and the different techniques. I guess all of us are using something like large language model to generate textual data, but the same technology could be utilized to generate datasets, data entries, and even medical images. And in many cases, it's quite difficult to distinguish if this data was generated or it was unique information gathered from our patients or in our research labs. So we need to have a certain type of verification framework developed to automate process of data validation and other ways to understand if this data could be collected in real practice. And, in many cases, these ideas are related to distributed ledger technology like blockchain, and utilizing such a tool allows us to keep at least time and date when this information was gathered and entered. If we are keeping this data in open format, open source, and it's accessible for unlimited number of scientists, we have increased chances to identify if there are some discrepancies in this information, and it could lead to identifying if this data was generated and it shouldn't be used. And of course, we can utilize certain type of AI models to analyze this data and to distinguish if it was fake or not. So One of the good ideas here is to utilize blockchain technology for data integrity gathered from scientific studies. And actually, there are several initiatives to utilize certain type of blockchains in this way. And of course, in some cases, they're related to financial schemas, and we should step aside from financial side of this technology. And if we're talking about technical utilization of distributed ledger, it could be quite beneficial here. Another problem is related to knowledge distribution and barriers. First of all, data access models are different for different types of data sets. They could be not publicly available, and majority of data sets are proprietary, and there are a huge amount of data being stored in pharmaceutical companies, and they are utilizing them inside to compete with our other companies. And if they will share this data, it will compromise priority. So there should be ways to be able to keep all interests in place. And one of the projects related to such a thing is iterated learning, when we are able to exchange derivatives from data to train certain model for disease detection in medical images, for example, and it could be trained on proprietary datasets, which we're unable to share. Of course, there are questions related to publishing this information and how this knowledge, how these research results should be shared. There are also platforms for data exchange. In many cases, they are related to open access in knowledge transfer. And the other problem is different types of data which require a combination in our research pipelines. If we're talking about biopharmaceutical data, we have so-called omics datasets, and first of all, it's a combination of textual data and genomic data, molecular structures, targets for our molecules which have biological activity, and AI models are only as good as they are trained on. So omics data will be very important to utilize to train our new models. And this is also another way to utilize federated learning by gathering data in decentralized way, in vector format, to train our solutions. Another way, the idea here is to standardize ways how we can federate this omics data, and how we can create a framework to analyze all this information. So we need to develop universal data standards to work with multi-omics data, and this will allow us to keep private data intact and at the same time to perform our studies. Something easier to be implemented, or it could be also related to federated vector databases, is retrieval augmented generation. This technology allows us to work with dataset which will be introduced into a large language model as an addition. So this model will be provide answers based on this dataset. And this technology is being developed right now to utilize not only textual data, but other types of vectorized information. It could be images, it could be sequences, it could be molecular structures, and based on this input, for example, molecular structure of our target in our body, model will be able to answer with a structure of new drug or to communicate with this structure within our organs. And this technique is based on vectoral representation of information, and these data vectors could be found in database in relation to our query and added to request, send it to large language model. So it's quite important to go deeper in this technology and to understand how it's working. One more thing to mention is how we are working with publications, and peer review was an idea when someone is being able to publish his work, another scientist will be able to repeat the same principles, the same algorithm, the same methodology. And in many cases, it's quite difficult to repeat the studies because they could be performed on closed data sets, or they will require specific facilities, specific equipment. And in many cases, this peer review right now is being only performed in only theoretical form, when we just analyze structure of work, if everything is consistent, and should it be published. But it's quite difficult to confirm that results published in this paper are clear and sound. So traditional peer review process is often slow, being delayed, and in some cases, critical findings are being published when they're not that needed to general public because there were other ways to solve a certain problem already in place. So for scientific community, it's quite important to be able to share this knowledge before publication. And it could be done with preprints, with post-publication review technology, with AI-assisted peer review, and transparent peer review platforms. So right now we are in the process of transition from classic peer-reviewed journals to novel platforms utilizing different principles of publication to increase timeline to make this delivery of knowledge faster. I will not go deep with ethical considerations and principles, but we need to understand how this data and the models made based on this data will affect our society, and how this data represent diverse population. And in many cases, it could be a problem because there are different capabilities of data gathering in first world countries and in the rest of the world. To battle this problem, we are able to introduce collaboration hubs combining different countries, different scientists, and addressing this problem in our data representability, data gathering, data diversity. So it's a very important initiative to proceed with. So in current days, we have development of certain pathways in data management for scientific research. First of all, it will be data proof with machine learning and machine readable techniques of data collection. So this data should be structured, it should be stored in easy access format to analyze with um, statistical techniques, machine learning techniques, and so on. We need to have universal research identification system, so we will be record when certain research project started, and it will be better if we will be able to research, to address, to associate data entries with these research identifiers, to be able to confirm in future that a certain dataset was assembled during a certain period of time, getting data from these named institutions and scientists, and we are able to trust this information. We have a lot of biopharma specific AI challenges right now, like omics data utilization and huge data sets related to patient data and federation of this information, federalization of this information will be very useful. Another way to battle these problems will be related to cross-industry collaborations, combining knowledge from different data sets, and as a result, we'll be able to produce better outcomes for our patients and to speed up our pipelines in drug discoveries. So in future, we will have research data management augmented with AI to be sure that we are able to trust this information from our research, from other research, and this data mainly, I hope so, will be open for access to train new models. And based on these studies, we will have new discoveries and they will be addressed with data authenticity, access barriers overcome, and it will generally increase the whole research ecosystem. So I guess it's all for today. Thank you for your time. See you next day.